We have received some questions via email, and Lisa Reams has those. I'll be watching the chat function as this goes on, and we'll be picking questions out from both the email and the chat as we go through it. And so the general format is that I'm going to give a little bit of an opening, very little bit of an opening, turn it over to Lisa, who will then introduce our four speakers. The bulk of the time, though, is really intended for Q&A and for interacting. We're social animals, and this is really an abnormal time. It affects everybody, irrespective of age or gender or ethnicity, and it's tough. And so I was really pleased that PCOA was able to find these four experts in their field who each have a different skill set, and therefore will be able to field a lot of different kinds of questions. My interest in this really was solidified in the last year or so as I walked through the loss of my mom in very touching settings that many thousands of people in this community are going through right now, seeing her alone at home and trying to get her out and all of that. Now that we are doing this as a community, and I sense it in emails, I sense it in people's phone calls and conversations, that people are just getting cabin fever, and this can have significant psychological and physical health impacts on people. So let's just get on with it. Lisa, we've got some really quality people to make some presentations, and then we get into the questions and answers.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve, for coming up with this idea and encouraging us to put this together. I'm going to introduce our four panelists one at a time, and each of them is going to spend a few minutes telling you kind of from their perspective some of the important things they'd like you to know about social isolation in older adults. So I'm going to start off with Dr. Lisa O'Neill. Lisa is the Associate Director of Research and Education for the University of Arizona Center on Aging. And she's a clinical assistant professor for the College of Medicine, Division of Geriatrics, General Internal Medicine, and Palliative Medicine. She has more than 10 years experience providing geriatric education and training for both academic and community audiences. Lisa, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? You're muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me and see me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, it's so nice to see everybody's faces. This is such a great idea, and I'm so happy that I get to participate. I come from the University of Arizona Center on Aging, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of background and some research information that might be helpful. And as Steve said, you know, we're social animals, and being connected to others is really considered a fundamental human need. And in fact, it can be crucial to our well-being and even our survival. Extreme examples show that when infants lack human contact, they fail to thrive and they often die. And remember that our prison system even uses solitary confinement as a form of punishment because it's so awful. In 2005, the World Health Organization recognized the importance of social connections, and many countries such as the UK and Australia and Denmark have national programs to combat this loneliness epidemic. And it's prior to this pandemic, it was estimated that 35 million Americans live alone, and 8 million older adults in the US are negatively impacted by isolation. That's 1 out of every 4 adults between the ages of 50 and 80. And that was before this pandemic. And now social isolation is affecting everyone. So often social isolation and loneliness are used interchangeably, but they are a little bit different. So I just wanted to go over the definitions. Social isolation, you know, occurs when a person has little or no contact with other people. It can occur over a short period of time or a long period of time, and it's a distinctly physical state, but it can cause many emotional effects, including loneliness. Loneliness, on the other hand, is an emotional state. It's defined as feeling alone, separate from others, feeling empty and vulnerable. Loneliness can be reactive, which is something we all experience over the course of our life for short periods, times of transition, move or get divorced, have a death of a loved one, or it can become chronic, recurring, and long-lasting. And that can impact our physical and mental well-being. Loneliness can lead to isolation. People who feel lonely for long periods of time can have a hard time engaging with other people in social situations. So the loneliness and isolation cycle can feed itself, and sometimes it can be very hard to break. But it's really important to note that while social isolation and loneliness are often connected, not everyone who is alone feels lonely. So I like to really make sure that that's really understood. And then I just wanted to give you some quick snippets of some of the research over the last 5 years. So risk factors for loneliness and isolation can really be applied quite broadly across all age range, genders, and health status. And research shows that for every level increase of isolation, there's also an increased level of risk. Less than half of all Americans report having meaningful social interactions, like having an extended conversation with someone on a daily basis. So that's less than half of our society that reports doing that. 43% of older adults, 60 and older, report feeling lonely. That's a pretty staggering statistic. Social isolation impacts us physically and mentally, and it has been shown to be regarded on similar magnitude as obesity, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It impairs our immunity and gives us an increased risk of anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, stroke, coronary artery disease, cognitive decline, frailty, and even death. Loneliness and social isolation are also predictive of suicide in older age. And interestingly, it's noted that Medicare spending is associated with social isolation more than $6 billion annually. So that sort of gives us a rough framework for this conversation. And I'm not going to take up too much more time because I really want to get onto the other experts, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lisa. It's just an honor to have you here with us. You're a wealth of information in the community. So thank you.
Yeah.
We'll get more questions to you as we go, I'm sure. Next, I would like to introduce everyone to Sharon Glassberg. Sharon is a wellness and support specialist and clinical therapist at Jewish Family and Children's Services of Southern Arizona. In addition to providing counseling support to people of all ages and backgrounds, Sharon works with our community's Holocaust survivors, providing support and programs toward improving social isolation. Sharon does presentations throughout the community on a person-centered, trauma-informed approach to working with aging populations and those who care for them. Sharon, we're delighted to have you here too. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with everybody this afternoon. It looks like the numbers keep growing too, which is kind of great. So I want to begin by introducing you to the brain. A fun fact about the brain, or an overwhelming fact, is that there are 84 to 100 billion neurons in our brain, all working in a synchronized fashion to keep us functioning. If we look at a comparison, there are 8 billion people on the planet. That means that there are more than 10 times the number of neurons in the brain that there are people on the planet. So just imagine trying to coordinate everyone on the planet in a synchronized activities. That's what we're asking our brains to do, which leads to reason that in moments of high stress, it is normal that we would have challenges with the thinking parts of our brain. Our brain is complicated, but I'm going to try and pare it down a little bit here. Experiences first enter our brainstem, or what some call the reptilian brain. This part is responsible for our blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, our basic needs to survive. It is also where our stress or trauma response comes from. You've heard of the fight, flight, or freeze. I like to add to that the word appease as well. The midbrain is responsible for our motor regulation, appetite, sleep, our emotional responses. It is the biological equivalent of our internet. It is the neural information superhighway. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, where our skills, are stored. Skills relating to thinking, empathy, judgment, problem solving, insight, flexibility, all of those things that make us human. So how does this look in real life, and why is it important? Well, the lower half of our brain has to be regulated before we can access the thinking part of our brain. What is also important for us to realize is that it takes time for messages to reach the different parts of our brain. And we can use this knowledge to help ourselves move from an initial event, especially a stressful event like social isolation, like what we're going through now, towards accessing emotions and then logic to aid with clearer thinking and problem solving. So here's a little bit about how that works. We all have a startle reflex at birth. If you're walking around and you suddenly hear a loud noise, your ear will trigger an extremely simple change of events that connect the spinal cord and the brainstem. Within only 5 milliseconds, hundreds of muscles are recruited into a self-defense reaction. There's absolutely nothing you can do about that. By the time you're consciously aware that you've been startled, you're already about 2 feet up in the air. Given a few more milliseconds, the body is able to respond in a more nuanced way. When something threatening occurs, it takes about 12 milliseconds for the information to reach the part of the brain that can emotionally process what is happening. So imagine that you're getting into bed and you pull back the sheets, and there right in front of your face is what looks like a huge bug or a snake. Your brain triggers a fight or flight response, your heart rate goes through the roof, your pupils dilated, and you hear yourself scream. A half second later, your consciousness and logic kicks in, and you realize it's actually the glasses case you lost earlier in the day. So in times of stress, we have to make sure our basic needs are taken care of in order to move from that emotional response towards more logical thinking. Part of that has to do with regulating our body, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our body temperature. All of these are unregulated in times of stress. Let's think back to those glasses on the bed. Another way to look at it is through the idea of an adrenaline rush. Maybe you've had a near miss on the road, or you almost took a fall. I bet you were not able to access a logical thought until that rush was over. That's what being regulated is. So how can we move towards regulation, especially at this time? Well, one way is through the awareness and the recognition of what our brains are processing compared and contrasted with our current situation, and use those cues as we move throughout the day. Voice and choice is something that's very important. At this time, we may be feeling a loss of one or both. Where you have previously been able to visit a friend, go to the store, even order from a menu, those things have changed and can make us feel helpless. It is important to acknowledge this loss and find ways to regain both within this new normal. For those of us that have experienced trauma, especially trauma in our childhood, it's important to access the awareness of the differences between then and now. Remind ourselves that we are an adult in these current circumstances. We have greater resources, skills, and capacity to process current events, even if it doesn't feel true all of the time. Which leads to the importance of acknowledging your feelings. Now is not the time to set high expectations. We cannot discount the psychological effect of this time that may prevent you from reaching those goals. It's okay to not be okay. Acknowledge and validate your feelings, accept your negative emotions. We spend a lot of time validating others, normalizing their negative experiences. Now it's time to embrace ourselves. Recognition of distress and negative emotions can go a long way in normalizing things for all of us. Breathing is everything. It will help your brain process from stress towards logic. It will help you recognize what you have rather than what you lost. Take the time for deep cleansing breaths with long exhales. I use the inhale through my nose for a count of 4 and the exhale through my mouth for a count of 7. It's amazing how much that goes towards regulating my emotions. Listen to others and to yourself. Take care of yourself, recognize what you need, and ask for it. Lastly, Try to find the gifts even at this time. Thank you.
Wonderful, Sharon. Thank you so much. It's nice to understand how our bodies and our minds tie into everything that's happening right now and better understand what we're all experiencing. I'm happy to have you here. Next, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Amanda Sokan. Amanda is an assistant professor with the College of Public Health at the University of Arizona. She holds a PhD in gerontology, a master's in healthcare administration, as well as a law degree. Her interests straddle the nexus of gerontology and healthcare and include such areas as elder rights and justice, elder abuse and mistreatment, cultural competence, LGBT aging, long-term care, healthcare navigation, and health promotion. She serves on the Pima Council on Aging Advocacy Committee, as well as on its board of directors. We're happy to have you here, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Hello, everyone. You've heard the first two speakers talk about one, isolation and loneliness, the difference, which is really important, the perils that they constitute for individuals, especially older adults, and just the broad range, right, from poor health all the way to death. So take-home message, isolation and loneliness, serious issue. And then we had the next speaker talk about our brain and how it responds to all kinds of challenges, the implications of that response, and ideas about ways to help. So what I want to talk about is another way to help, and that is spirituality. One of the first things that I want to get off the table very quickly is just what place spirituality holds in all of these conversations that we're having. Under normal circumstances, when we think about optimal aging, we already talk about holistic and integrative approaches to a definition about what it means and how one can age optimally. And one of the things that we focus on is the balance between health, well-being, and all the different aspects of life. So to achieve that balance, we're looking at the 4 dimensions of life: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. And you don't have to believe me, because even the World Health Organization realized in 1946, when it came up with the definition of health, that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease and infirmity. And as we go through life, we see how this becomes more and more important. So what is the aspect that latches onto the well-being, right? The social well-being and the mental well-being. And we found over time that spirituality is a really key ingredient in determining, defining, and also promoting well-being. But what is spirituality? The first thing that people think about is religion and faith, right? And so if you're a religious person, if you practice some sort of faith tradition, then you're spiritual. But spirituality is a whole lot wider. It's a much broader definition than religion. Religion and religiosity is certainly a part of spirituality, but spirituality is a bigger, broader umbrella. And so it includes all kinds of practices that may not involve a relationship with God or with the divine, or however that's defined, right? So if we wanted to come up with a really simple definition for spirituality, it would be something like the deepest values and meaning by which people seek to live, some kind of vision of the human spirit and of what will assist it to achieve its fullest potential, right? And that includes things like searching for meaning, for deepening our awareness of self, others, and the world. And so that's the definition of spirituality that I'm going to work with. Now, spirituality is important because it enhances and promotes late life well-being and adaptation under normal circumstances. So now just imagine when you layer on that the sort of trauma and the sort of concerns and anxiety that we're going through at this particular time. Our 2 speakers talked about things that trigger this sort of poor health and negative conditions. And I don't know, if I had to come up with something that would threaten health and well-being, I think COVID-19 really figures high on that list. It's probably the highest that I have ever had. And so what is it about COVID-19 that threatens our spiritual health? It's stuff like fear, like uncertainty, the sense of disconnection, especially with all of the shelter in place and the social distancing that we're all having to experience. That's definitely increased isolation. It's the sense of loss that people are feeling, and loss in different ways. Loss of relationships, of that personal touch, loss for some people of members of their families or their communities who've died because of the virus, loss of the ability to connect with people in ways that we did before, right? To go out grocery shopping at a regular time of day, right? And engage in the things that we enjoy. It's the increased dependence that this is meant for some people, and definitely increased awareness of our own mortality, right? And the anxieties that come with that. So, question is, how do we address these things with spirituality, and what is the promise that spirituality holds? Quite a bit, actually. We have a lot of research and evidence-based support for just how well people who are spiritual, how much better they do. Outcomes of diseases, of treatments, just a general acceptance and ability to adapt. And that's because, if nothing else, being spiritual, however you channel that, right, can be a coping mechanism. What makes it a coping mechanism? It's because it does certain things for us, right? It allows us to seek some sort of meaning for life or whatever it is that we're going through. And in the process of attaching meaning and figuring out, what is this? Why am I here? Why is this happening? That gives us some sense of process management through whatever's going on. Spirituality gives us a sense of purpose. It helps us to cope, and it definitely breeds resilience. So if you take faith-based practices, for instance, the belief in a being that's higher than we are, a place to go for support, a place to go for help, right, is a really powerful, it is a really powerful thing. Spirituality also helps us enrich our lives. It improves that mind-body connection, and you can see that in processes like meditation, participating in yoga and Tai Chi, and a lot of complementary and alternative medical regimens that we get from the East. So that mind-body connection, being in the moment, being mindful, trying to enjoy what we have and where we are at a given point in time. So the important thing to look at going forward, though, is how do we enhance this? You know, how do we promote this? I could sit here and talk about spirituality, but then what does that mean? How do we acquire that in our own lives? The good news is there is a diversity and plurality of forms of expression of spirituality, from things as simple as music, as dance, art forms, going out into nature, taking a hike if you can, walking in your garden, gardening, participating in religious rituals or faith-based practices that give you comfort, doing something from way back when you were much younger that gives you peace and brings you to a place of meaning. So sometimes baking some old recipe, right, is a good thing to help connect your present self to your past self and to give you hope for the future. The important thing is recognizing that we need to be open to addressing our spiritual needs, to recognizing them in ourselves and in others, to understanding that in trying to deal with the things that, that distress us and bother us, dealing with our own pressures are helpful. Helping other people navigate their own pressures are also helpful, because remember, spirituality is about transcending our own selves and our own needs and connecting with others. So that connectedness is important. But how do you do that in the time of social distancing, right? We just have to be a little bit more creative in terms of what we do, use technology when we can, use old school methods of posting a card or writing a note, and remembering that it's important to know when to turn things off and when to turn things on. Paying too much attention to the COVID news all the time, if it has a negative effect on you, is not the best way to go about it. And also to focus when we do on the good news, the things that are an upbeat, the things that, you know, what great things people are doing, the sacrifices people are having, and the results, you know, the people who are discharged from hospital rather than the people who died. And so I'll take any other questions that you might have later on. I think I may have exceeded my time.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was really interesting. And I'm sure we will have questions related to much of what we shared. Very valuable. I want to share a couple of housekeeping things before our next speaker. We've had a couple of requests from folks messaging saying that everyone is sort of talking a little bit too fast for them to be able to absorb all the meatiness of the information being shared. So I just want to throw that out to all of our speakers when we're answering questions. And I'll try to remember to slow my speech down as well. I also want to share with everyone that we will have one more speaker, and then we're going to get to the question and answer portion. And I would love everyone to be thinking of questions you'd like to ask our speakers. So if you could think of some questions and chat those to everyone in the Zoom chat screen, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So our next, and certainly not our last, or our last, but certainly not our least speaker, is Deb Seng. Deb has provided support and direction to older adults seeking purpose and hope as a speaker, a volunteer coordinator, and a therapist. She holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, and she currently works at Pima Council on Aging, assisting older adults and family caregivers to find meaningful connections and resources while navigating the challenges and losses of aging. Deb sits in the office next to me, and I miss seeing her every day at work. It's great to have you here, Deb. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It really is a privilege to be here with each and every one of you. This is a part of connection that I think so many of us have lost. As I think about what the other three speakers have said, there's really a lot of thought about creativity and ways of meeting needs. And the challenges and the issues that have been described really represent vulnerability. So it's my privilege today to talk a little bit about what opportunities we have in addressing that vulnerability by identifying needs and options for meeting those. You know, there's been a huge focus on creatively meeting needs for older adults in our communities. And there's a group known as the influencers of aging. It's a diverse group of thought leaders who recently published an article. And they said all of us are in this unique time where we're not just living through one pandemic. We're actually living through two pandemics or epidemics. The first one, of course, is COVID-19, but the second one is that of loneliness. And that's a sobering thought. You've heard a lot about the vulnerabilities that we face physically, relationally, and even spiritually from our other speakers today. And what I want to talk about is really figuring out how we identify the needs that we can meet and really try to cope through these epidemics in successful ways. Almost 100 years ago, a very well-known psychologist came up with the idea that we have 5 basic sets of needs. That psychologist was Abraham Maslow, and you may have seen a pyramid that talks about the hierarchy of needs. At the very foundation of that pyramid are 2 primary sets of needs. The first one is basic. It has to do with having food and water and shelter. And the second one is safety. For the first few weeks of this COVID-19 epidemic, I think all of us rallied to ensure that for ourselves, our loved ones, we had those basic and safety needs met. And I don't know about you, but for me, what has really fallen off over the last several weeks, now that I have enough toilet paper and paper towels, is really those other higher level needs, those 3 other levels. And those include love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization or fulfillment. You know, love and belonging is that 3rd need, and we all have it. We are in an opportunity to be creative in finding ways to connect with other people. For those of you that are tech savvy and have joined us on this meeting today, I'm sure that you know that there are all kinds of ways to connect with folks, whether it's FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Instagram, and other video chatting platforms. But you may not be as familiar with the fact that there are ways to play games with your friends and family members online. There are a number of online game platforms for everything from Scrabble to Risk to chess, and many of those are free to you. There are other ways to connect. You and a neighbor might be able to pull up AARP's, Movies for Grown-Ups. There's one coming up here very soon, and then be able to discuss that by phone. And of course, we've all seen the window visits and the neighborhood parades. This is an opportunity to resurrect, if you will, some of those older school ways of connecting with folks. And it's not limited to sending letters. One of my colleagues made the suggestion that keeping an ongoing log of daily observations, daily points of gratitude, or things that seem important is a way to not only connect with yourself, but it's something you can share with your friends and loved ones later. And for those that are actually at home and providing in-person caregiver to a family member or to a loved one, there might be other ways to create some meaningful connection in creative ways. It might mean preparing a snack or a meal that has some kind of historical significance. You might choose to reminisce and look at photographs and review your family history. Or believe it or not, listening to the music of your youth has found to have huge emotional, physiological, and brain change worth. But it's not limited to love and belonging. The fourth need in Maslow's hierarchy is that of esteem. For our purposes, we're going to talk about it as respect and admiration. And in these simpler times, it really means looking to adjust our perspective and our expectations. It takes not much to look at the language that we're all using and that we're hearing daily and feel really imposed upon and the negative outcome of it. What I mean is we're talking about quarantine and self-isolation, social distancing. All of those things, at least to me, feel very out of control. What would happen though if we started using words like retreat or self-reflection or safe distancing? It comes with a little bit more empowerment. One of my other colleagues mentioned to me that she had attended a webinar where the presenter actually said that maybe we should talk about or think about this time as cocooning. We are bundled up safely, but it's with the purpose of investing energy and effort in order that we can emerge not only healthier, but better and more beautiful. We also can look at our expectations. You know, I've heard and seen on social media, people want to do full-blown house renovations and transform their bodies and change all of the chaos into complete order. And I don't know about you, but right now, sometimes survival feels like the best that I can do. And so I end up disappointed that I haven't met my own expectations and even more exhausted. But what if there was a simple project that we could complete? What if there was one focus on health that we could improve? Or what if it meant just simply doing something nice for another person or creating a healthy memory, happy memory? That final need that Maslow identified was for self-actualization, that place where we find fulfillment. And right now that starts with taking really good care of ourselves. To take care of our body means to breathe, to hydrate, to get some activity and some stretching, and to focus on nutrition. For mind, there's all kinds of programs available where you can have a meal together that's intergenerational online, or tour a museum or attend a lecture. But it's also a time to find purpose and plan. Are there things that we can be doing now? There is so much that we can't control, but there are things we can control today. Are there ways that we can create meaning, that we can make joy for ourselves and somebody else? And is there a way that we can begin to create a legacy even in these difficult days? This epidemic tragedy is just that. It's a tragedy of loss, including loss of control. But those influencers of aging that I referred to at the beginning insist, this is now a time that we need to think about how we can flatten the loneliness curve and put into place those measures that will carry us and our communities through this crisis into a new and more beautiful era. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. A lot of really good hints and tips there. Appreciate the practicality of all of that. From a standpoint of wanting to get to some questions that you're asking, I want to take a moment to explain to everyone how to access the chat feature on your Zoom screen if you haven't done that before, just to make sure everyone has equal access to being able to chat. At the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, there should be something that says chat. And if you click on that, it'll pop up on the right hand. For me, it's the right hand side. I assume it's the same for everyone. A Zoom group chat. And then you can, you want to select what says to, and there's a drop down menu. You can select everyone in meeting and ask a question there. So hopefully, if you aren't sure how to do that, we can see if we can walk people through a little better than I just did, but hopefully folks can access the chat feature. We have had a number of questions emailed ahead of time, and so I want to start asking some of those. And some of them are right in line with things you all talked about, and some of them are much more practical, very specific day-to-day concerns people are having too. If I could ask each of you to start though, somebody wants to know, this is a lot of information. This all feels really overwhelming with what to do right now. Where do I start? If I was just gonna pick one thing and do one thing to help me feel more connected and more centered, more in control of what's going on, what's one thing that I do? Amanda?
Did I hear my name?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So this is probably not going to be a popular answer, but it's the truth. Give up trying to control stuff. That is an exercise at this point in futility, and you only set yourself up for failure. Rather than seeking to control stuff, ask yourself how you can make the most of where you are right now and of what you're experiencing. Find things for which you can be grateful. And trust me, there's a lot. There's a lot to be grateful for. One of the most important things that I've ever heard is the fact that happiness and peace of mind, we think that they're outcomes. We think that there are things that happen to us, right? But really they're choices. You can choose to seek to be happy regardless of your circumstances. So rather than seek control, I would say try and find meaning, try and find that sweet spot. What is it? Find something to be grateful for. I loved what Deb said about gratitude. Find something that you can be grateful for. Find something that gives you hope. Find a way to be generous to yourself and to other people. We've been given the gift of time. We really have been given the gift of time. How we choose to use it really is a choice that we make every moment. Don't think of a big choice. Just make that choice for this moment. In this particular moment, I choose to be hopeful. I choose to be grateful for what I have. I choose to see the good and the positive, and I will leave the next moment to the point when I have to deal with it.
Can I tag on to that?
Yes, Lisa.
So, you know, the other thing that I would say is really important to do, it's always important to do, but particularly now, is not to compare yourself to anybody else. I think that one of the reasons I really wanted to stress the difference between social isolation and loneliness, and that you can have one without the other, is that you will have friends and family members who are not lonely. They are completely fine in this with this new norm. They're doing great. They're Zooming all over the place and having FaceTime with people, and they seem fine. You'll know other people who are really struggling, really missing the handshakes and the hugs and those, you know, coffee at the water cooler. They're missing those environments. So really focus on how you feel and try not to compare yourself to how everybody else appears to be feeling, especially on social media like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, because, you know, we always, on those environments, we put our best foot forward, and that's not always how everybody's really feeling. So just remember that. Don't take it too personally. Don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay to feel lonely and to not like this at all. That is a perfectly acceptable emotion. And so I just wanted you to know that it's okay to just embrace where you are. The other thing I would suggest is maybe don't watch so much news because it increases your anxiety. Just maybe every other day catch up on what's going on, but too much news right now I don't think is a great idea.
Thank you for sharing, Lisa. Sharon, do you want to share anything? What idea?
Sure, there I am. You know, just kind of bouncing off of the other two speakers, I think it's really important asking yourself daily the question of what expectations can I let go of? So those people who are remodeling their homes and, you know, doing all sorts of things, if that was an expectation you have of yourself, how can I let go of that? And then how can I be really okay with that? I also think it's important to recognize when we're not okay and not try and push ourselves out of anything, but to maybe stay in that place and reflect and use that time to also compare to how that time is different from now. I think it's really important to stay present, not to go past. In times of isolation, in times when we have a lot of extra emotions and not an outlet to do with those emotions as if we were when we were seeing people and sharing things, I think it's important to stay present. You know, I often think about driving a car. If I'm looking in my rearview mirror the whole time, or I'm looking 4 lights up, I miss what's right in front of me. And that can be a detriment to not, and really lead to sort of this sense of immobilization. So I think recognizing where we are, embracing if we can get to a positive place, but also say, you know what, I need a little bit of a pity party for the next 45 minutes, and then I'm going to jump back in. You know, recognizing what we each need of ourselves. And sometimes we can't access that because the world is so crazy and moving so quickly. Now's our opportunity to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Sharon. Deb, did you have one idea you wanted to add?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. I would say one of the things that we can do is really remember our humanity. I know that as my family has gone for walks in the evening, there's just such fear of people anymore. And as I think through some of the tragedies that we've been through in communities or as a nation, we have been able to come together in person to make a difference. And we can't do that right now. And so if we reflect on our humanity, we can do the things that Sharon and Amanda have suggested that we do. Remember the humanity of other folks as well. There's something to recognizing that if I can be a safe, comfortable, stable place for someone today, if I can extend a kind word, if I can be a source of encouragement, if I can even be just that voice that someone else can hold on to, it really does make a difference.
Lisa, I have a question from the chat that I'd like to ask. But before I do that, Deb mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I thought it was interesting. About 4 weeks into this, somebody did a study as to people's buying habits. In the first week, they found people were buying toilet paper and things like that. The second week, it was school things for people to be the homeschooling. The third week, it was hair care products. It was hair coloring. So our needs sort of changed, and people's buying habits reflected that. The question on the chat really breaks my heart to even read it, because it is exactly where I found myself, and I'm sure lots of others. The question is that this questioner's mother has advanced Alzheimer's and is living in a very good small assisted living home. Her communication skills are not good. They've done the window visits and they've done the FaceTime, but she's confused and feels really alienated since she can't sit with her family and hold hands and do all the touching that we're so used to doing. The question is, what can this person do for her mom and the rest of that type of population? And she sends kudos out to the staff in the assisted living home. They're doing a great job trying to be that family. One of our presenters grab that one.
I'm happy to do that. And I'm going to acknowledge up front, there is no satisfying answer to your question. It's an opportunity to be creative and to figure out if there are ways that Family photographs can be arranged and mailed to her, or the family can hand draw or paint cards or pictures that might help her to reorient. And it would be important to remind her of names and stories that go along with those things as well. She's likely not going to be able to remember them completely on her own, but if the context is provided, it might jog a little bit of memory. The other thing that we've been doing is suggesting that if there's any way to work with the actual facility to get some kind of technology and that they can assist with, so that it moves from telephone chats to video chats. It's not nearly as good as holding someone's hand or giving them a hug, but it is a way to provide the additional context that hopefully would be of comfort.
I think this is a good time to remember that the sense, this is not ideal, but I think it's a good time to remember that the sense of touch is only one of several senses, right? I definitely think, and I'm making this up as I go, but I know that there's some movies, home movies that my family watched and grew up on, and that always brings back, you know, that warm cocoony feeling. Maybe send a tape or a video of one of those to watch. How about a smell that she recognizes? I don't know, is it lavender or something that's unique that reminds her of gentler, better times? We have to do the best with what we've got. Unfortunately, it's not a lot, but let's think of the other senses as well outside of touch, because that's not on the table.
This is
A couple of people chatted in some answers to that too, that are along the lines of what Amanda just said. Want to share some music that they once knew and maybe recording your own voice saying hello.
And this is Lisa. The only other thing I wanted to tag on, it is a heartbreaking situation, and I'm so sorry that this is happening. But I wanted to just say, don't be so hard on yourself. It sounds, just with your very brief description, you are doing so much already. You're doing everything that you can. And she's in a safe place. You like the staff. Those are all positive things. And I just wanted to say, just, you know, sometimes it's not perfect. And this is certainly not ideal. And, you know, our heart breaks for you and your heart is breaking, but please be kind to yourself, because you are doing everything that you can.
Can someone speak out? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, my mother was in a facility, the Forum, and I have since brought her home with me, but she keeps in contact with a few friends who have no one that they keep in contact with. So I'm thinking that something like this, if I could get this information out to those people and maybe they could get it to other people in the Forum, I think this might be a really great place for them, a start for them to be able to listen to other people and understand what their feelings are, and maybe they can let people understand how they're feeling, because they're very isolated, and I'm really, really concerned about the people in this facility. It's very frightening to me.
So I know the speaker, and I'll reach out to her after the call.
Thank you.
If I could just add too, I think it's really important to be present with those, you know, that are there. Sort of be person-centered is really what it is. So to validate what they're feeling, to validate what they're going through, it's difficult with somebody who's got some decompensation, you know, to understand what we're going through. But don't press yourself to make that understood. You know, come at it from a place of sensitivity, from a place of empathy, and from a place of, you know, let's have gratitude for the time that we can spend together. I found this really wonderful home video that I want to share with you, Mom. or I was making cookies the other day and, you know, thought about you. So to really turn it into a situation where we're not focusing on what's lost, but instead focusing on what we have and what we can access. And for those of us that are children and caregivers and really love this individual, sometimes we get caught up in trying to replace what's gone, and that leads to a lot of self-frustration. So I love the idea of give yourself a break and really try and go forward with things that you both can enjoy. I think it's important to have that piece.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Yeah, a couple of the questions that came in via email are also about skilled nursing facilities or assisted living facilities. So since we're kind of on that topic, I wanted to see if there's other, these are more of a kind of a practical nature of how can I be sure my loved one is okay if the nursing facility won't let me see them. And people saying that they understand that a facility is required through the governor's executive order to allow people to have access to video communication with their loved ones. But if they're having a hard time with the facility doing that, or they're not necessarily getting the answer that they want from a facility or the assistance from a facility, what they can do to work with the facility in that. Does anyone have thoughts for them? I can share for a moment. I serve as the Vice President for Programs and Services at Pima Council on Aging. And one of our programs is the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. And every facility, a licensed assisted living or skilled nursing facility, has an ombudsman assigned to that facility. And there are numbers that are posted at the facility for how to reach their ombudsman for the residents. But you can also call PCOA's helpline 790-7262. And get that information as well about how to connect with the ombuds folks. And they're there to provide resources for residents. And if a resident requests it, they can use an intermediary with the facility to help get the residents' needs met. So if there are challenges with communication with the family, that's certainly something that they can talk with the facility and help with.
Lisa?
Somebody's asking to
there.
have the phone number repeated. I'm not sure what phone number. Okay, it just went up on the chat.
Went up on the chat. It's 790-7262. That's Pima Council on Aging's helpline. And we have helpline specialists Monday through Friday available to answer questions and provide resources for older adults and their loved ones.
I think participant Lucy too wanted to speak.
Hi there, can you hear me? Okay, hi, I'm a volunteer with Sunrise Neighborhood Assistance Program, SNAP, and we have a couple of support groups that meet now via Zoom for caregivers. So Logan, I think it's you who was asking if your friend would like to participate in that. That's okay, you can certainly contact me later. Let me say that the family council of a facility, of a local facility where we meet normally, as well as the caregiver support group, has requested of staff that they set aside certain hours during the day to communicate with family members and loved ones who are in memory care. It's working well. There's a 2-hour period that now is set up for that on a scheduled visitation where clients or residents from memory care are taken down to the dining area so that there's closer contact through a window anyway. And it seems to be working quite well. So all I would suggest is that you work with that facility for those of you who have concerns about loved ones being in an assisted living or nursing home or memory care unit at this time, because they recognize the governor's mandate and they really want to work with it. It's just a question of being able to set it up on a schedule so that there's time for everything else during the day. Thank you.
We have another chat question. We had some more feedback on how to interact with the loved one, tell family stories over and over, sing together over Zoom, get them some familiar foods. The new question is related to everyone having a different sense of what shelter and home or shelter in place and social distancing really mean. How would the speakers recommend dealing with the differences in a kind way that still allows you to set boundaries?
I think
man.
it's really important. You know, that question is so important, and it can certainly lead to more anxiety experiencing that we're experiencing on our own if we go out and the social distancing of somebody else is not sort of our definition of what social distancing is. And I think it's important at that time maybe to relate back to our brains. What is my initial emotional response? It most likely is one that comes from a place of anxiety and trauma. So to really be able to take care of ourselves, to do that deep breathing, to allow us to access that logic in our brain towards not immediately reacting, especially in times like this where we are realizing more anxiety and stress. It can lead us to doing things that we wouldn't ordinarily, that wouldn't be us. So I think recognizing in ourselves what we're going through when we're, and I'll use the word triggered, by somebody who's not following our specific interpretation of what social distancing looks like, can help us then to find a comfort level with, do I want to speak out? Do I want to make sure that I'm safe? Do I just want to distance in what feels safe to me? Or do I really want to help somebody to learn what that means? But realizing, I think, is a really important part that we all have different interpretations, and we're all maybe watching different newscasts which say different things at different times. It can be very confusing. And I think we can go back to that empathy for one another, and realizing that we are all truly in this together, I think can help to figure out now what boundaries does that going to connect to for me.
I think to add on to that, three things come to mind when we're dealing with ourselves and we're dealing with other people. And in truth, that question about boundaries is not a new one, right? It's one that existed before. We're just trying navigating a whole different, playground, right? Without rules for doing this. I think we really need to pay attention to three things. Well, we need to think about our intention and the intention of the other party. We need to pay attention. Well, we need to focus on attention, intention, and attitude. So when I say intention, what is that person's goal, right? So when this person wants to meet with you, or when they define these boundaries differently, what is their intent, right? Sometimes when we understand what that person's intent is, we might be better able to satisfy that need without compromising on our boundaries. What are we paying attention to, right? So are we paying attention to fear? Are we paying attention to anxiety? Or are we paying attention to our own needs? And what should that be? So for instance, if you have someone who's immunocompromised, right, who lives with you, and you have somebody else who just absolutely loves them and wants to come visit, those are some serious conflicts, right? How do you protect this person who's at risk, real risk, right? And how do you honor that relationship? So paying attention to the most important thing at that particular time is the risk to that person. The intention is it's out of love that this person wants to cross these boundaries that you've set, right? You can adjust your attitude, and with the right attitude, explain why these boundaries are important, right? What the risk benefit is, why you're having to take this stance. So rather than just thinking of, oh my goodness, I have my boundaries and you have your boundaries and you're crossary, let's extend grace, right? Consider what that intention is, right? What do I have to pay attention to? And how do I adapt my attitude so that I don't get between myself and the important message of what my boundaries are?
Thank you, Amanda. Everyone, please keep submitting questions on the chat. I'm going to go to another email question right now. Someone that I know, as a result of this social isolation, seems to be becoming more and more depressed, and I'm worried about them. What should I do? Who wants to take that one?
I will jump in again. I think very simply, reach out to them about what they need and how you can help them. I think it's important to engage them in a dialogue. I really do. Let them share their needs and not keep them bottled up. One can work with anybody who's depressed as much as that person is willing and able to access what you're saying. So it might just be, I kind of think of it as, you know, jumping on the back of the train and riding along with them. You know, we can't touch, we can't hold hands, we can't hug, but how can I give a virtual hug by letting you know that I'm here? I think it's important. I think it's really important to listen. So when somebody's in that state, to listen without judgment. We have listening and we have hearing. Oftentimes we're listening and we're formulating our response in our head, so it leads us to not be as present as we would. So it's listening with the intent to understand. And just being is really important, and allowing that person to share without judgment in a really safe space.
Anyone like to add to that? Lisa, Deb, Amanda?
The only thing that I would add would be to, you know, like this question is specific to someone they've been watching them, they are aware, they've seen the differences, and they think they're becoming more and more depressed. And I think Sharon's answer is spot on. If you get to that point, I would just, my perspective, just to back up just a little, would be, how do you recognize if someone is becoming more depressed? You know, because a lot of people you talk to might seem a little sad or, you know, a little different just because of the circumstances. So how can you tell if the people you are talking to are really moving more into a depressed state? And just, you know, quickly, and I'm sure Sharon can elaborate, but some of the common things to kind of look for, you know, are they withdrawing from loved ones, friends and loved ones? Are they, if you set up a FaceTime or a chat call, are they no longer participating? Are they no longer doing some of their favorite hobbies at home? If they, you know, put puzzles together and they're no longer doing that, or they painted a lot and they're no longer doing that. Not going out at all, you know, just if fear is keeping them inside 100% of the time. If they get, if they seem unhappy, if they're indecisive, if they're irritable, or just, you know, overwhelmed. Those are some of the kind of clues that I would say just everybody should be aware of with our friends and loved ones. And then, as Sharon said, reach out and talk to them and, you know, say, I've noticed a difference, and how are you feeling today? And even if they don't want to talk about it, you can just internally know, well, I'm just going to reach out to them every day and just, you know, and we don't have to talk about you being depressed, but we can talk about anything else. And that can help someone get out of a funk and just help them kind of move forward. So that would be my only contribution to that.
I think it's important to normalize what they're feeling, that it's not, oh my gosh, this is a psychotic episode, and, you know, but it is a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. And I think that is important to really recognize and to, validate for others.
There's a similar question on chat as long as we're on the depression thing. A person writes that they're suffering from insomnia and feels as though others are doing the same thing, although they don't feel stressed. Why is that happening and what's a remedy? I seem to be dreaming a whole lot more vividly these days too. That's a brain question.
I also had somebody from email comment that they felt more scattered and not able to concentrate very well. Is that common right now? So I wonder if those all sorts of symptoms might be going together.
Not to go back to it, but I'll go back to it. It's sort of where our brain is processing. And right now, I think a lot of our brains are processing at the brainstem level. Similar to Maslow's hierarchy is what are our needs that need to be fulfilled immediately? Do I have the food? Do I have the toilet paper? Do I have, am I fearing of what's around the corner? And some of those thoughts a lot of times will seep into our subconscious if we haven't really been able to process through them. And I think those come out a lot of times at night. Even if we're not feeling stressed, we are isolated, but we're not in a bubble, that has no walls. We are isolated and are able to see what's going on in our world. And all of those things kind of seep in. I know, Steve, I'm the same way. I'm getting all this seepage into my dreams at night. I'm also, when I go out, I'm wearing a mask and I'm seeing others wearing a mask. And it creates another level of anxiety. I found that I can only really go to one place maybe in a week because of the anxiety it causes. I also feel for some reason that the mask is creating a little bit more of a scatterbrain to me. I find that I don't recognize the same steps that I've gone through in the past. So I think all of these protective measures, social isolating, social distancing, wearing masks in public, really are barriers to sort of accessing what makes us human. And in my interpretation, it's leading our thought process to be kind of stuck. Stuck in a way of, I need to survive. I really can't access sort of the thriving at this point.
I would tag on to that and just say insomnia, particularly I think in this new norm for us of staying at home, sheltering in place, I think our routines are thrown off. And I think that you can somewhat expect your sleep routine to be thrown off as well. So, because this comment says I don't particularly feel stressed, but I'm not sleeping well. I would work hard to sort of get back into, as best you can, a new normal routine for you. I would watch your caffeine intake. I think we're all a little too close to the coffee pot and the refrigerator. Watch what we're eating and move more. I found my biggest movement some days, I was looking at my phone and watching my steps, and it was like 300 steps for the day. I was like, oh my God. And what that was going upstairs and downstairs and basically from this bedroom to the refrigerator and back. So like, oh, this is not good. So move more, and that will help kind of recenter you and get a new routine. Wake up at the same time of day, go to bed at the same time of day. Try to keep, even though we're not getting in cars and driving and seeing our friends and meeting for coffee and doing some of those usual things, make a new routine and stick to it the best that you can.
And so this might be a Deb and Amanda thing, and it follows right on with what you're saying. Somebody mentioned breathing exercises, and the questioner's asking what sort of mental exercises can be calming.
Sure. Going back to something that Sharon said, in some ways it can feel like we're stuck. And part of that stuckness is that I think many of us are thinking about one thing all the time, and that is the virus. Part of the mental exercises that we can undertake to kind of change that up for ourselves and to create calm is to focus on, and intentionally with a discipline, focus on things that we find beautiful, inspirational, or meaningful. Whether it's something with nature, whether it's pictures of the people that we love, whether it's something that is spiritual, whatever it may be, and take the time to think about it. Think about it deeply. Use the other senses that we have, like Amanda had mentioned before, and then take some steps with it. What would those steps be? Put something into action around it, whether it's journaling or reaching out to someone, but really changing our focus from just the fear and the anxiety and the frustration we have about the virus itself to that which is beautiful and meaningful.
I'd love to add to that, Deb. Thank you so much. Someone asked the question earlier on about control, and I said, let's just give up on that. But there are other things that we do that are within our purview. So we can change the narrative. That's a power that we have. So for instance, Sharon talked about, and it is so true, right? It's something that we see in those movies where everything's gone to pot, right? And the world's come to an end. People in masks, we're all wary of other people. It's not business as usual. But maybe we can start a little bit at a time to change that narrative for ourselves. So when I wear my mask and I encounter somebody else wearing their mask, instead of that triggering fear, how about we swap it and it triggers protection, right? So I'm doing my bit to keep you safe and to keep me safe. Thank you for that. Rather than, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to get. It is true that what we practice becomes stronger. If we focus on fear and on the anxiety, that's going to get stronger. And it just takes a little bit of practice. If we focus on the positives, right? So what's good today? What's the silver lining, right? Rather than the deprivations, which is much easier to see and all-consuming. I think we could begin to change things.
Here's another question that was emailed before. Someone's wondering that they've never been a part of a faith community, but during this kind of time of crisis, they're feeling a need to want to have that kind of a faith or community spiritual connection. Does anyone have any helpful tips for them as far as how they might begin to achieve that kind of a connection without having a faith community? Thoughts, Amanda?
I feel like I should jump in here, right? So the first thing that I want to say is there is no requirement to have had a history of faith, right? No one's on the clock here, right? So if you wake up today and you feel called to a particular faith practice or a search for meaning somewhere, grab it and take it. When you look online, there's so many different faith systems sharing what they believe, providing opportunities for people to virtually join the prayer groups, whatever that might be. I bet you, I'll put good money on it that they're not going to turn you away because they never heard of you before, right? If ever there was a time to come together as community, this is it. So if you can reach out to a group, it doesn't matter what group that is, that's a good thing to do. There's another way that we could look at that question, right? It could be that you used to have or be part of some faith practice that you gave up on for whatever reason, right? And somehow in today's world, you find a pull back towards those rituals, or some of those rituals give you comfort. Again, no judgment, right? No judgment, no spin. Go back to what gives you comfort. Reach out for that which enriches your soul and gives you meaning and helps you cope with whatever it is we're going through.
People are chatting to utilize laughter, to be thankful to some of the frontline people like grocery store clerks. Spirituality for Dummies has helped this person find a spiritual connection. There you go.
Steve, do you want to take another chat question?
Well, yes, and maybe this is a PCOA question because there are two parts to it. One person is asking whether or not we are aware of assisted living or hospice facilities that will allow family members in or visitors. I thought most hospice was allowing one family member, but another person is asking, and this circles back to the concerns about the quality of care that what would we recommend? I'm throwing this to PCOA, I guess. What would you recommend when residents are concerned or family members are concerned about quality of care, but the people don't want to speak out for fear of retaliation?
So I think it's really important if they're willing to talk with the ombudsperson at PCOA, they will be a listening ear for them, and they can do some problem solving and brainstorming with them about ways that we might be able to assist them in getting that need met. And if it seems like there's something that a report needs to be made to Adult Protective Services or the licensing body, the Arizona Department of Health Services, we can certainly assist that in happening as well. And off the top of my head, I mean, I'm not aware of facilities, particular facilities that are allowing family visitation in the way you describe, but you could certainly call PCOA's helpline, and if folks there know of any or can find out anything about that, they'll be happy to try to provide that information.
The helpline is 790-7262.
Correct.
This would be for Lisa, and it's there's a person who is interested in getting access to the data points that you referenced back at the beginning in your comments about the number of people experiencing social isolation. Is there a way that can be posted somewhere so participants in this can get access to it?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I can give you, I'll send Lisa at PCOA, a list of the studies that I looked at. I didn't go too deep because not everybody gets excited about research. So I didn't want to bore people, but yeah, I'm excited. I will share it with you. I'll send some links to some good articles that can be interesting.
And then how would we get that out to the people participating in this list?
Don't know that we'll have a list of the people participating, but if we share the link to the recording of this on, let's say, Steve, in your newsletter or through PCOA's website, we can share a link to those resources as well.
Okay.
I have an emailed question. So someone hasn't been able to see their spouse for over a month now, and I'm assuming the spouse has some sort of dementia or cognitive impairment, and they wonder if their spouse will still remember who they are. Question breaks my heart. Deb, you have any thoughts on that?
It's such a heart-wrenching question. And with cognitive impairment, and specifically the different types of dementia, the manifestations and the progression of those is different in every case. And so there are things that would preclude that memory, and there are things that would contribute to that memory. So Amanda was spot on. Using the 5 senses, and this actually goes back to brain science as well. Anything you can do when you're reacquainted with your loved one who has cognitive processing issues or dementia that involves their historical 5 senses. So what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they taste, what they can feel, actually will have the ability of drawing back any recollection that's possible. Again, going back to the music of their youth, that is a way to reconnect with folks. And those embedded memories that come with the 5 senses are much easier for them to access. And understanding that they've been through a difficult time and knowing that you've been through a difficult time of missing them, it's important to go in holding expectations and hopes loosely, that we'll find the gift in what is when things come back together, when you all are able to come back together. But we just can't anticipate and know those things in advance.
It's really, it's just so hard. It's just so hard. But you remember who they are. You remember what that person means to you, right? And you love them. And that energy comes through, right? What you don't want to do is, and sometimes we do that, we beat ourselves up so much, right? We're so engrossed and engulfed in what could have been and what we've lost that we forget that we also channel our anxieties and our hesitations and our pauses. So go in there, there's nothing we could do about this. But when that time comes, go in there as fully conscious of the fact that you know who they are, you've loved them, you continue to love them, employ the rest of the other senses, and just take it from there. It's a new day. Beating ourselves up about it in the interim is not going to help anyone.
Easier said than done. Yeah. What we are running short on time, and so this is a question for PCOA possibly. What resources, we're all linked in by technology here. What resources might PCOA have to reach out to low-income, blind, monolingual? This is a fairly unique way people are connecting these days, but we still have people who don't have access to this kind of technology.
I'll field that at least from a couple of perspectives. Our reach is personalized, but it might not be as broad as it needs to be. And so we have lots of opportunities to learn and grow as a result. I can speak for my team here at PCOA. We have literally been going back through the records of every family and older adult that we've worked with since the beginning of January of this year. And we are reaching out to them with cold calls to find out how they're doing, to find out what their needs are, and to resource them with what they need. For some folks who are needing friendly phone calls, we have established volunteers and interns who are calling them on a regular basis. We're working with our community partners to make sure that they have access to the counseling support, the food support, whatever type of support that they're in need of. And we are connecting people to by phone and online resources as well. So it is a very targeted, very personalized approach. And I think that one of our takeaways is, as this pandemic comes to an end, will be to assess our efforts and figure out, should this happen again, how we can be even more effective than we are right now.
I know at Jewish Family and Children's Services, we're doing a similar thing to, especially the Holocaust survivor population. They're being called every week, sometimes more than once a week, assessing what their needs are. I think it's important that each of us take on the responsibility, if we know of somebody in our world who needs help, to be able to call the resources like PCOA, to call the agencies like Jewish Family and Children's Services, because the sort of silver lining, in Amanda's words, at this time is that the communities are really pulling together to not let people fall through the cracks, to make sure that we give people what they need, not only to survive, but maybe do a little thriving at the moment as well. And I think it's important for us, we're coming together as a community here, for us to really look out for one another. And if there are people that we know or don't even know that well, to know how to get them to those places of connection. We're taking a village here.
So we're within 5 minutes. I think I'd like to just throw one final question out for each of the speakers to field, and that is from the standpoint of the people who, one of you mentioned that we're not all feeling this the same way. Some of us are out doing our jobs and connected with lots of people during the day, whether it's virtually or by phone or by text or email. There can at some point also become a sense of overload from those of us who are not isolated, but feels, you're doing a Zoom, you're doing a text, you're taking a phone call, you're looking at 3 different emails. And at the same time, you're sort of feeling burdened by the person who's left at home, the people, your loved ones who are left at home, that you are concerned about. So is there a message that the speakers would have for the people who may not be the isolated ones, but are feeling a particular burden for those that we know are sitting home alone and are just flat lonely? It feels almost like a sort of a guilt thing going on.
I think the word compassion fatigue comes to mind. We all are compassionate people at our core. And we have to check in with ourselves as well as that we're checking in with others, and recognize when we're getting a little bit too fatigued and somebody else's situation might look really wonderful to us at the moment. And one of our speakers mentioned at the beginning, you know, don't compare. You know, somebody's social media is oftentimes their highlight reel. You know, nobody puts down their real deep sorrows and challenges on Facebook. You know, they want to put their happinesses and what they're able to access. And it's important to check in with yourself at this time and, you know, find a resource that you can talk to. Find somebody who can really hear you.
I would say, just to tag on to exactly what Sharon was saying, also just remember, don't be so hard on yourself. I think guilt in this time is as well as depression and anxiety. Those are emotions that I think are fluctuating through everybody. And I think that, you know, stay as present as you can. Try not to worry so much, and try just to get through each day the very best that you can. Try to reduce your guilt and just be kind to yourselves. It's, you know, and like someone said, that's easier said than done, but it's an important skill. You know, really be kind to yourself. Know that you're doing everything you can for you and for your loved ones, and that, you know, this too shall pass.
Explore that guilt. Explore it. You know, why are you feeling guilty, right? A lot of times, that inability to understand, it's that intention, attention, attitude thing I was talking about. We need to get to the bottom sometimes, if we can, of our motivations. Why are you guilty? Or why do you feel guilty, right? And then maybe when we answer those questions honestly, then we can deal with them appropriately. For instance, we might find that there is no reason for us to feel guilty, and we can put that away. And we might find that there is some other action that we can take that assuages that guilt, right? If we feel a sense of responsibility. So if you have to be out there working and you are not suffering the isolation that other people might be victims of, think about, it's that narrative thing. Think about what it is you're giving up and what it is you're contributing to the general good and how that helps. That doesn't take away from us the responsibility of maybe checking in on ourselves and saying, okay, how much is too much? This is, we are definitely in need of heroes, but we're not in need of heroes at all costs, right? We don't want the heroes that are so self-sacrificial that they burn themselves out. And it's up to us to determine the boundaries that work for us. What's too much? When should I say, okay, this is enough, I need to go recharge, I need to go refresh my batteries, and maybe part of that is refreshing batteries for somebody else who might be isolated, right? And maybe in that way I can assuage some of the feelings that I have. So it's not about brownie points and being out there and separating ourselves from other people. Lisa is absolutely spot on when she says we should be kind to ourselves, but part of being kind to ourselves is being honest with ourselves about what we're going through, what we're feeling, and how to forgive ourselves. Sometimes cut ourselves some slack, right? And live in each moment. How can I make this moment the very best that I can make it? No guilt, no judgment, no spin, and you move on to the next.
I like to say guilt is irrational obligation. So if there's a way that we can regulate ourselves and get to that sort of homeostasis, we can figure out, what's behind this?
And I would say as well, intentionally creating simple moments of sweetness, whether it's savoring a cup of tea or coffee, whether it's lighting a favorite candle, enjoying a bubble bath, whatever it is for you, creating those sweet moments so that you can recharge.
How's that for a closing thought? Lisa, you want to close? First of all, I want to thank Lisa, Sharon, Amanda, and Deb for really carving out the time, and Lisa Reams for really helping facilitate this, Maddie Bynes for for quarterbacking it, and it's been really, really informative. And so, Lisa, why don't you go and shut her down?
Absolutely. I ditto all of that and just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today while we explored this important subject. I know these are challenging times, but there's also much opportunity here as well. So may you find it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.